Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl. This week, it's another conversation recorded at Notch Brewing during the Forever Lager Festival. In a moment, you're going to hear from the brewers of Wild East Brewing, Working Draft, and Dovetail. It's a bunch of cool brewers doing cool things. But first, please go visit allaboutbeer.com. There, you can find original articles, reviews, news, insights, and other podcasts. Listen to shows like Brewer to Brewer and the All About Beer podcast simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. You can also follow All About Beer on Instagram, Threads, X, and Facebook at All About Beer. And to keep up with all of the smoked beer news and releases, make sure you check out This Week in Rauch Beer by searching the group on Facebook or follow at TW Rauch Beer on X, Threads, and Instagram. Glassware and apparel is available on allaboutbeer.com/merch. This show and all of the work we do, it's supported by you. Please go visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer. A few dollars goes a long way to help fund writers, photographers, creators, and editors. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising and supporting All About Beer, please email us at info@allaboutbeer.com. When we were putting the panels together for Forever Lager, I put some holder text in as we figured out the scope and the lineup. Session 3, which you're about to hear, was dubbed Cool Brewers Doing Cool Things. And it stuck. And that's what you're about to hear. 3 brewers that I'm about to introduce and the cool things that they're doing.
I am honored to be here hosting this panel. So when we were putting this together, Chris Loring asked me, he's like, all right, let's do 2 sessions in the morning. Let's do 2 sessions in the afternoon. One of them has to be decoction mashing. And that comes up after this one. I'm like, oh, one of them has to be about lagers because it's a lager festival. And it's like, oh, and then why don't we do one about New England because we're in New England? What is that 4th one going to be? And I was like, I don't know. I'm going to call cool brewers who are doing cool things. And then we'll figure out a title for this later on. And then it just became cool brewers doing cool things. And as I've been walking around for the last 4 hours, I've had brewers who are not you 3 come up to me being like, what the fuck? Why am I not in the cool brewer panel? And I'm like, because we have the coolest brewers. And let me introduce them to you right now. Brett Taylor is the co-founder and head of brewing at Wild East Brewing Company in Brooklyn, New York. He previously brewed at Fifth Hammer Brewing Company, Kagan Lantern, and Strong Rope Brewery. He interned at 6 Points and is a graduate of the American Brewers Guild. And before brewing, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time tonight, spoiler alert, he worked as a cartographer and graphics editor at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and he's originally from Pittsburgh. That last part we're not really going to talk about. Clinton Lohman is the co-owner, head brewer at Working Draft Beer Company in Madison, Wisconsin. He grew up in southeastern Wisconsin and has been working professionally in the Madison area for almost a dozen years now. Previously, he worked at the local homebrew shop, a wine and hop shop, on and off for several years, and worked at the Vintage Brewing Company and Wisconsin Brewing Company before opening Working Draft with co-workers from his wine and hop shop. Working Draft is a small tap room and brewery on Madison's Near East Side that opened up in 2018 and focuses on European-style lagers and American-style hoppy ales. Jenny Pfafflin, hi Jenny, is a brewer and marketing and creative manager at Dovetail Brewing. It's a brewery in Chicago that specializes in continental European styles and traditional methods. She's also an advanced cicerone, which dovetails. Like you do it. I don't pre-read these things, and I love that you put in parentheses on here, that which dovetails her interest in the traditions of both brewing and beer service. Welcome to the 3 of you. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for being in Brighton. How is Boston finding you all so far?
Hungover.
That's it? That's
the gist of it, yeah.
All right, so we're at a lager festival, and there's something to be said about lager beer and where it is in the American craft space right now. And I want to talk about lager a little bit. And when you look at some of the other national publications that follow the business of beer in a nitty-gritty way, a lot of it sucks right now. Numbers are down, brewers are struggling, prices are closing. I'm usually not one for, let's find the optimism. But earlier, I was told that I was mean and only asked the mean questions. And so I'd like to ask the nice question about, as we're here among friends, among fans and fanatics and drinking lager beer, what are you excited about in the beer space right now? Brett, let's start with you.
I'm excited about the fact that all of these breweries are breweries that are weathering this current storm that you mentioned.
Yeah.
By making beer-flavored traditional beer rather than trying to hang on to a hype era that's basically in the rearview mirror at this point. So I think that they're for breweries that are nimble and who are in touch with the traditions. I think we're all going to be quite okay.
All right, Jenny.
Well, just being here, I feel like a little bit of a kid in the candy store.
Do you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time that I've been able to look at a tap list and know that I'm not going to be able to get through every beer that I want to drink tonight. So there's something to be said about that, too. There's still a lot of... it's also incredible that this is the inaugural festival, right?
Yeah.
This feels like an established festival. It feels like that this has been something for a while.
It is a well-oiled machine.
Yeah. And that's also very, very telling and very incredible that all these people came out here and are enthusiastic, and that the brewers also came and showed up and are representing their beers as well.
Yeah. Clint, what about you?
I'm excited that it feels like while this could be viewed as a negative time in beer, a decrease in growth or whatever, I think it's actually a very necessary and important maturing of the industry. I think that a lot of what's happening is kind of mirroring my own path through craft beer and starting with lighter things, working into more intensely flavored things, and then kind of coming full circle back to more sessionable beer and more beer-flavored beer. And so I think that certainly some breweries are not going to survive this, but overall I think I'm hoping that we come out of this with a more kind of stable craft beer industry.
Can we talk about mirroring a path, though? Because I feel like all of you are on this journey where you're doing cool things with well-established styles that have been around for a very, very long time, but trying to bring it to either your own neighborhoods or trying to do something that is special to you while honoring tradition as well. And I wonder, Jenny, you're nodding along on all this, and I'm wondering, like, where are you as a brewer on your path? That was such a Midwest response. Oh, geez.
Oh, geez. What a question.
Oh, yeah. Doctor. Yeah.
On my path as a brewer, I'm constantly just trying to achieve ways to make sure that I am hopefully making beer that people enjoy. I guess what you were talking about was like, how are we bringing beer to our neighborhoods? And going back to what you were saying about the maturity of maybe some craft beer drinkers and the quote-unquote beer-flavored beer. Beer-flavored beer is the most consumed beer in the world, right? Like 90% of beer consumed is pale lager. And how do you connect with your neighborhoods through a pale lager? And I think a lot of it comes down to service traditions, which I think a lot of these breweries here also bring to their tap rooms, like Human Robot and their milk pours, or their milk tubes, I think it is. Cohesion, of course. almost replicating down to the very tiny detail of Czech beer service. And I think making those connections with the people that come into your tap rooms, and how do you bring them in? And I think one of those things is through beer service traditions.
I want to get to beer service in a minute, but like, where are you on your journey right now?
I mean, we're such a young brewery. We're such a young brewery. I'm basically at a point where we are. I mean, it feels like a return to a beginning, essentially, because we opened at the sort of tail end of we have a couple of renowned IPA breweries in our neighborhood and in other half in Finnbach, and a lot of other really solid ones. And there wasn't really, even if I wanted to do that, there wouldn't have been a space for it. So for me to come out with decocted lagers on Lukers and package conditioned mixed firm saison and English ales on cask, like it was just like, it was the right thing at the right time, and it just happened to be the thing that I like to do. Where this goes from here is I'm going to assume that these styles, which have been with us for hundreds of years, are going to continue to be well regarded, and it's just my job to keep my finger on the pulse of what is the sort of what is the hip trend, and to not like completely turn my back on it or ignore it, but just like incorporate it in a way that I'm comfortable with in my sort of like traditionalist approach to beer.
Clint, what about you? Like, where are you on your journey right now?
I feel like I'm at a point where I'm trying to bring everybody along with me. The Midwest especially is a weird, kind of its own place where we tend to resist trends and not quickly adopt outside trends. And so in one way, we're always like 10 years behind, but at the same time, those cycles are coming through. And so it feels like I'm both in the current stream of what is popular and also a little bit ahead, because people are coming full circle. They're going through the hazy IPA and super strongly flavored trends and pastry stout and all that stuff. And I like to think that my own travel through craft beer is one that is relatable, and a lot of people are going to experience the same thing, where they just get kind of burnt out on these really heavy-handed beers and want to come back to more sessionable stuff. And so I want to be there for them. I want to help guide them through that journey and provide great sessionable beer-flavored beer for them, and hope that they enjoy it as much as I do.
So one of the cool things that I think you all do, or think about at least, right, is there's 10,000 breweries in the country. And so we're at this point where you could walk into a brewery and get their version of a beer and whatever they want their tap room to be, kind of thing. But all of you have actually thought about what you want. All of you have thought about like what you want your place to be and why. And service comes into that in a great way. And it's not only just like great service, but it's also the experiences. And Jenny, like at Dovetail, you all have done Kolsch nights, you all have done some other things. And that's not every night. It's a special thing. And when you do a Kolsch night, for example, I'm really wondering, like, who comes out for that and why, as best you can tell?
We really started doing Kolsch nights when things started opening back up after COVID shutdowns. And I think what brought people out and kept people out was the very communal aspect of Kolsch service. Yeah. I did that. So anyway, yeah. So I was like, so that's why I think cold service became a successful thing for us. Was when you do cold service, there's nothing that you need to think about, right? The beer is just put in front of you over and over again. You get to share tables with people that you might not necessarily know. They become their neighbors, their new friends, and I think that experience of beer drinking is what people come and want to experience when they do Kolsch nights at Dovetail.
Yeah. So, Brett, what are you all doing to make what could be a normal Tuesday night not a normal Tuesday night?
Well, for one thing, our Tuesday night bartender, we sent over to Pilsen to get trained at Luker.
Okay.
With Andre Roosevelt, the 2022 national champion tapster. And so you get a very special pour. While we're not a tank pub per se, he guarantees that your glass is the same temperature as the beer he's going to fill into it, and you get a perfect pour every time. So I think that that's a Tuesday example, but honestly, I endeavor to have, we have probably the best Luker program in New York City, and we have the best cask program in New York City, and you're guaranteed to get a really good nitro pour. So we just make sure that it's it's very much about experience, I think, in this era, and we make sure that you get that from the beer standpoint, served by a person who really knows what they're talking about.
And I feel like that's probably true, right? Even if people walk in and they don't know that you've put that extra effort into service, they might come. Is it a subtle thing? Is it a?
I think beer should always be easy, right? You shouldn't have to think too much about, as somebody on the other side of the bar, when you order a beer, you shouldn't have to worry about whether or not the beer is going to be the right temperature or in the proper glassware or anything. You just need to sit down, look at a menu, and be like, that's the beer I want. Yeah. And then it's up to you in the tap room to serve that beer in the best way possible. There's one of my favorite beer sayings, I guess, is a Czech saying that it's the brewers make the beer, but it's the bartenders that complete it. So everybody has a hand in this process, right?
Yeah.
Starting with the maltster all the way, and the beer is not completed until it's in front of the person drinking that beer. And I think you don't necessarily need a Luker faucet to give that experience to a customer. It could be as simple as serving a Hefeweizen in a Hef glass.
Yeah.
And that in itself makes it a very special, I think, experience.
All right, so Clint, same question to you from earlier. What are you all doing that you feel gives those people who walk through your door in Madison an experience that they're not going to necessarily get from? I mean, I'm not going to name other breweries that I know in town, but you're here and they're not. So what are you doing?
Well, we have 10 years before we have to worry about this. I'm just kidding. I mean, a lot of the same, right? It's the right glassware, the right type of pour, the right faucet. It's kind of transporting people to the places that these styles originated from and making them feel like they're sort of stepping outside of Madison, that they're not there in our tap room, but they're in a Czech pub or a German pub or an English pub. We do beer engine pours and cask conditioned ale as well. And so I just love bringing those styles and traditions to Madison and letting people explore them and participate in them, or there's always people that are aware of them and excited that we're the ones kind of passing that torch along.
But when you do it night after night after night, are you conditioning people to be better drinkers?
I hope so. Yeah, too. Yeah, I hope so.
That's my thought.
Yeah.
Right, but I mean, go into that a little bit. You two jumped in, jump ball kind of thing. But if you just walk into a place and it's like, oh, here's a pint glass of whatever, and there's no pomp and circumstance, there's no like whatever kind of thing, sure, you get used to it, but like, do you make people, the three of you, like, do you make people feel better about putting dollars across the bar when they come into your places because of what you're doing?
I mean, that's the hope. It's no secret that I come from a state where there's a not always super positive drinking culture.
Okay.
That is centered more around quantity
you guys
versus
put a
quality.
rack of ribs on top of a Bloody Mary.
Yeah.
And they're like, it's a cocktail.
We got some things we do. And so, I mean, I would love to see us contributing more to a more thoughtful drinking culture. I find a lot of romanticism in German and Czech drinking culture and a lot of the European drinking cultures. And so trying to but bring people along this ride of like, hey, here's another way to think about drinking beer instead of like shotgunning Miller Lights at State Street Brats. You know, it's like not... That's the majority of it, and so
Jenny's like, that's not too bad.
I mean,
I went to the
of
University of Wisconsin, so I definitely I have definitely shotgun Miller.
You
Lights
had
at
a
State
glimmer
Street
in your eye as he was saying it. It's like, oh, wait a minute, pal. Like there was definitely a little bit of
I'm not shitting on it. I'm just saying there are other options. Trying to add to it, not subtract from it.
But Jenny, you all do Kolsch service,
Yes.
and you do it in a way where that's the only thing you all serve that night. Mm-hmm. You're out there, like it's a thing. Do the people who come out for the novelty of that then come back?
Oh yeah, certainly there are regulars to Kolsch nights for sure.
Yeah.
It is an experience. We don't do it very often, so it's an experience that you can look forward to like quarterly. And come out and just enjoy a night of Kolsch service like that. Yeah.
And then, Brett, like you're also normalizing a lot of styles that are out there these days in Brooklyn, where like you can walk into any bar in Brooklyn and get reasonably priced Sierra Pale or other beer, or Brooklyn Lager, beers that we have known for a long time. So when people come into your place, you spend a little bit of time educating them on what you're serving.
Totally, and I mean, that's a part of what we have to do because we're using we are using a lot of traditional methods. We're also a lot of traditional serving styles. So occasionally we have to explain that no, that beer on the cask engine is not warm and flat. We still get that. But I mean, to touch on your original question, I honestly I think that that when you set a high bar, as everybody in this room does, then you establish a high bar, and if they kind of the casual drinker learns from that, and so they go to my place, and they experience that level, and then they go to your place, and they go to your place, and once they see that versus how other places handle it, they start to recognize a bit of a stratification in sort of the quality of the presentation and what gets served to them, and then they start to understand almost inadvertently the difference between the sort of the high end and the middle of the pack.
Jenny, you're nodding in agreement there.
No, absolutely, I agree. I think you have to give that experience too, because let's also be honest. Like craft beer is not a cheap pint either, right? Like a lot of people might see a menu and be like, I might have one and I'm gonna get out of here.
But if you give them that extra show, if you give them that extra sense of, I know I said pomp and circumstance earlier, but like for me, like the first time I went to Cologne, I knew what I was going to expect, right? Like, because I'd read up about it. And then when I experienced Kolsch service in Cologne for the first time, it's like, I never want to leave. Like, I want to be tucked in a bed in a corner and then wake up 9 hours from now and then do it all over again kind of thing, because of just how special I felt. And I think that, like, there's something about the beer space that the three of you live in where you could also do that kind of thing. Like, Clint, does that track with you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think to echo Brett's sentiments a little bit, it's about just trying to, and Jenny's sentiments, like adding this value add, right? It's not cheap. And so what can we do to make it more than just about what the liquid is in the glass and more than about just drinking the beer? It's also about the experience and the service that you get and everything that comes along with it. And I think that's really important.
All right, so Clint, I want to keep going with you because one of the things that you're doing is beers that have adjuncts have been a dirty word in the beer space for a long time, but you have done some beers with not just rice but wild rice, and I want you to just kind of walk us through why you're doing that and what that brings to the beers, and then I'm going to bring in the other two to sort of like talk about like what they're doing with outside ingredients and why.
Yeah, so I think when people think rice, they think Bud Light or adjunct lager, where rice is added to kind of clean up some barley malt character, and you're trying to make something that's a little more neutral. And we've made a number of wild rice beers, and wild rice is, I mean, it's a different category. And every conversation actually that I've had in this weekend about this has kind of gone back to, oh yeah, we've made rice lager, and I'm like, no, but that's not what I'm talking about. It is technically, it's actually not in the same family as rice, but you hear rice and you think rice and you think
technically not how.
I think it's actually like a different plant family from rice. It's more of like a grass seed than it is rice. But wild rice, and most people I don't think realize this, because when you're talking about wild rice from a culinary standpoint, it's usually added in like a savory soup or something where you're not really getting the full clean expression of that adjunct. But when using wild rice, particularly in pale lager where it can really shine through, you get this really cool, like fruity, nutty, almost like blueberry, or I've had it described as cotton candy note that is super unique to that specific thing. I've never experienced that from another adjunct in beer. And it's a pain in the ass to brew with. You have to cereal mash it. It's expensive, at cheapest, like $5 a pound, which is quite a bit more than barley malt would be. So there's some limitations there, and I get it. But if you use it 10 to 15% of your fermentables in a beer, it comes shining through, and it's just a really cool, unique way to make distinctive, characterful pale lager. And I can't sing its praises enough. I want people to experiment more with it. I want more people to be using it. I got this from my former boss, Kirby Nelson, who's kind of like a Wisconsin brewing stalwart. And I feel like it's my duty to pass this along and have more people experiment with this, because there's so much that can be done with it, and I think it's a largely unexplored and kind of untapped avenue for lager beer, or beer in general, but specifically I will say I think it shines the best in lager beer.
Jenny, I don't know how much like you're signing off on purchase orders or all of that, but you also don't do anything cheap at Dovetail.
We don't do anything cheap?
Yeah.
Are you equating
like
adjunct or malt adjuncts to the cheap? So here's the thing. I don't think that's the case at all. Like we just don't happen to brew with malt adjuncts because we have a point of view where it's continental European styles, and we really stick in that wheelhouse. So the adjuncts that we use with our spontaneously fermented Belgian style ales.
Sure.
And we'll fruit them and whatnot. But as far as like the reason why we haven't used rice or cereal or et cetera, is just because that's just not part of our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I feel like, I think there's a lot of projection sometimes on Dovetail to be like this very traditional German brewery, but we don't use adjuncts, but that isn't because we're adhering to the German purity law or anything like that.
You guys mess around quite a bit.
Yeah, so we're a brewery in Chicago. We're not a brewery in Munich or whatnot. And I feel like sometimes you can become trapped by quote unquote authenticity. And I also think that's a big roadblock sometimes for brewers. Is like the pendulum can almost swing too far the other one way. You got the ultimate experimentalism, and then you have this very very narrow definition of what beer should be, and I think that's a trap as well.
Yeah. So, Brett, like, what do you do? Like, we've been talking about ingredients. Like, what are you bringing to your beers that sets you apart in Brooklyn or just in your own mind?
I mean, my general philosophy with ingredients is the same as my philosophy with process, and they're kind of the same thing. It's the what is the proper ingredient to use to make the style of beer, right? So
sure.
I'm a big crisp fan for the English ales. I use floor malted Moravian malt for the Czech style beers. I use German grown malt for the German beers, and on and on. My farmhouse style beers mostly involve New York grown ingredients.
Yeah.
And
because are you part of that farmer's license?
Yeah, I have a farm license.
Okay. Where does that stand right now? Because like you were pretty close to the calendar that I remember of like, oh, it's got to be almost all New York State grown ingredients, and then they dialed it back a little bit.
So I have a dual license that basically says I have to make 60 barrels a year of New York license. So I have to make 2 batches of 100% New York ingredient beer, which that's called April. So forget it. Like it's not even. I don't even pay attention to any of that. But yeah, no. Like it's. But like I enjoy using adjuncts where it makes sense. We have a new account that it's a restaurant group who wanted to do a light type lager or something in the Mexican lager vein, which I will never make a beer called Mexican lager because I don't believe that it actually exists. And so it's brewers in Mexico making beer that's similar to other styles of beer, and then it gets given a label, but that's not what they call it. So we made a beer. Yeah, it was a cereal mash rice lager with some corn, some flake corn. That's an adjunct beer. It's for an account who specifically was looking for that sort of thing. They're buying the majority of the batch. So this is great. I'm happy to send my beer to restaurants, especially restaurant groups whose clientele may not have heard of us before. So to me, it's a calling card. And then with the farmhouse style beers, like I'm happy to play around with a lot of different flake things or I use unmalted wheat occasionally. That's my idea of an adjunct. Candy bars and bullshit are not my idea of adjuncts.
Nor either of the two of you, I imagine.
Yes. I was thinking of a joke and I couldn't come up with it.
Yeah.
So, yes.
When you think about the creativity that you've brought to your beers right now, but also looking at the history of the beers that you're making and standing on the shoulders of the brewers that have come before you, I wonder, as people start to stand on your shoulders, as you become part of that wall of a strong foundation of brewing, where are you putting your efforts now, and where do you want to put your efforts going forward, Clint?
Thinking about like passing the torch to other brewers in the Madison area, I guess I would love to just. I look at communities like Denver or San Diego or areas where like the overall quality of beer is so high because there's this kind of dissemination of knowledge where any brewer that's involved in the brewing community there has so much available to them in terms of just like standard good brewing practice that the overall quality is at a really high level. And I would love to see that across the United States, but I can only really, for the most part, affect my community in any really important way. And so what I would love is to just continue to have conversations with and be a wealth of knowledge and sharing what we're doing and what works for us and what has been successful or not successful, so that we're raising the bar. You know, like we had a conversation, even we were talking about service, about what sets us apart or what do those things mean. And I think that all of it comes back to just when one brewery starts to do things a little bit better or in a way that is creating a better beer community in the cities that we're in, that the rising tide floats all ships. And so I think that's super important, because there's a natural competition that comes with that, and I want that competition is healthy. It's good. We want people to be trying to one-up each other so that we are all doing better and better and better as the years go on, so that it helps everybody, for our communities to be seen as positive or good brewing communities or as tourist destinations. It's good for the city, it's good for the economy, it's good for everything. So I think that's what I think of. I just want everyone to learn from each other and everybody to get better and do better all together, and that's important to me.
Jenny, you've been nodding along.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything that was just said. You know, Hagen, who is my boss, one of the owners and brewers.
Oh, I've heard of him.
Yeah. He started this thing called the Week in Route Beer, I think.
This Week in Route Beer. Yeah.
This Week in Route Beer.
I mean, he was there for it. Like, it was a communal effort. My attorneys seem to think that I'm the founder, but like that's fine.
One thing that he loves to say is, like, there's no secrets in the brew house. And it going back to what Clint just said, was just like the better beer that we have out there is going to bring people back to drinking craft beer. Otherwise, if there's bad beer that they're being served or they experience, they bring home, they see an $11 4-pack and they're like, okay, I'm going to bring that home.
Yeah.
Really like the label. They open it up and it's
garbage.
Not good beer.
No, it's bad.
They're going to go back to drinking, their high lifes. And so the exchange of ideas to make all brewers better, I think, is very important for the health of the industry.
Brett, do you agree with that? And then could, dovetail onto the earlier question.
No, I mean, I think... our entire industry is based on the rising tide concept, and I think, as Clinton said, like when one brewery pulls ahead a little bit in some way, it's not just necessarily like, that's not a better brewery. It's just they're doing a thing that other people are not doing, and then it's sort of like people are like, maybe I should try that. I want to do that because we're all very creative. We're all very creative at heart. So I think that when you establish that sort of like, let's try to keep up with one another, and it's a very friendly competition. It's not like, I don't know very many breweries who are at each other's throats. In New York, we're all very close. There's very few of us for the number of people we have. So.
But it's a run your own race thing, right?
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
It's like if you spend all this time looking at what somebody else in Brooklyn, what somebody else in Chicago, what somebody else in Wisconsin is doing, and just trying to keep up with them because you think that they are better, different, grab the zeitgeist, you're going to lose sense of your own selves.
Sure.
And I'm wondering, like, at a lager festival, right, where lagers are so fickle and hard to pull off, and when they're done well, which if you three are here, that means you're doing great lagers, and I've had all three of your beers today. How important is that about, it's almost like the racehorse with the blinders, right? Like, there's competition, but if you start to stray away, you could lose the way. How important is just for the three of you as brewers, and Clinton, I'm going to start with you and then go down the line here. How important is just knowing yourself as a brewer in this lager space and doing what you feel in this moment is the best thing?
I think it's very important. personally, I've kind of taken the path of, okay, what are the beers that I admire? What are the things I admire about them? How can I best emulate them in my brewery? And then once I get a good feel for that, I feel more comfortable adding my own creative flair to things. Yeah. Because there's so much tradition and there's so much that goes into it. And I feel like if you don't know the foundational knowledge, or if you don't know the basis of what makes that beer, then trying to experiment with it or get weird with it or add different things to it, it kind of comes from a little bit of like a misinformed place. And so
interesting.
Like, for example, we have a Czech Pils that is really popular that I, for the longest time, have thought about sprinkling in some American hops to that, and I have hesitation about it because it's a change to what is essentially a flagship beer of ours. But at the same time, I have a little bit of unease about how heavily inspired it is by a popular Czech lager, and it is different, and all these beers are different. You know, there's a lot of Czech lager on that wall up there, and I've tried a lot of them, and none of them have been exactly the same. And so that comes down to a lot of different variables, right? That's part of what makes craft beer beautiful and brewing in general beautiful. But I guess I personally would like to feel like I've come to a comfort level with a style before I start to mess around with it. So I'm messing around with it from a more informed point of view and place.
All right.
For me, I think the breweries that I look up to and the breweries that I think are most successful are the breweries that stick to their point of view. Yeah. And that's been something that I think we've done at Dovetail very well. Is we have
I'm not going to disagree. Like I am a fan of Dovetail, as anybody who listens to this knows. Yeah.
Yeah, like we everything we do is very intentional. Like, we don't do things for the sake of doing things. Like, we wouldn't, brewing a Kolsch was always going to be in the plans. Having a Kolsch service was always be in the plans. We didn't brew a Kolsch just so we could have a Kolsch service. Not brewing for the sake of brewing, because it's just part of our point of view. And I think, again, that's what I admire. Like, when I look at breweries that I admire, I can tell they have a strong voice. They have a point of view. They're not doing things for the sake of doing things, and that comes across as very genuine. When you walk into their tap rooms, you could tell when you're in a place where everything is thought of. Yeah. All the way down to when they're putting it in front of you to enjoy.
Brett?
Jenny just said the most important words, I think, in point of view. I mean, the first time I took to the keyboard to write the beginnings of our business plan in 2014, I said the words point of view. I believe back then that breweries needed to have a point of view. We have seen a lot of the history of American craft beer has been, we make beer that's not macro, and that's their point of view. And you could get away with that in a certain time and place, but you can't get away with that necessarily 10 years ago, and you definitely can't get away with it now. You need to stand for something. Why does your brand exist? Why are you doing this? Because there's a lot of hubris in this. Like, you outlay a lot of money to make a product that 10,000 other breweries are making. The same type of product. So you need to have a point of view. And I think that's what we do is what you're gonna get. I don't see. I've gotten rid of more styles than added them. Like, I phased out the Imperial Stout thing. I got a lot of neighbors who make great Imperial Stouts. It doesn't move the needle when we do it, so there's not a real point in doing it. I don't adjunct them. I make to the general modern public's version of Imperial Stout. It's quite boring because there's no lactose or marshmallows or anything like that. So I don't need to have that beer, so I just don't make it anymore, for example.
If I can piggyback off Jenny and Brett's points, I've also found this to be true. At our brewery, like, when we make fruited sours, which is very rare these days, they don't sell well. And I think it's because it goes back to authenticity. And I think the consumer is smarter than a lot of people give them credit for. they can smell the bullshit, right? If you are making something that you don't care about, you can try your best to hide that, but they will figure it out, that this is something that you don't really believe in and you're not passionate about, and then they're not passionate about it. So your passion in what you're doing always translates to the customer, whether you want it to or not, because it's the way you talk about it. It just kind of like seeps into everything that you do. And so I think that the bottom line is authenticity. Do you believe in what you're doing or do you not? And I think that you don't have to be everything to everybody. One of my favorite sayings is, if you market to everybody, you market to nobody. And so I think point of view is a really good way to put it. It also goes back to authenticity and just believing in what you're doing wholeheartedly.
All right, so to wrap this up then, let's talk about authenticity for a moment, right? We're here in Brighton, we're at Notch. This is, somebody said to me before, it's like, oh, what are you drinking? And it's like, whatever's on this wall is really good. Like, you can just throw a dart up and you're not going to be disappointed by the beer that comes your way, because Chris has created and curated a really great list. Brett, what is an authentic lager experience that you have had that you hope somebody else would go out and have?
Wow, I mean, there are several answers to this question. I mean, I can say in the caves in Urquell, like sure. That is an authentic lager experience that everybody should have. But you can also have an authentic lager experience could be buying a can at the corner, a 4-pack at the corner store of well-made beer and enjoying good conversation and just in a good experience. Like, it doesn't have to mean anything. It means what it means to you.
I like that. Jenny?
All right, I'm going to be contrarian.
Please.
I hate the word authentic.
Do you?
I hate the authenticity in the lens of beer, because
a personal beer experience that you would like somebody else to experience.
Can I explain why, though?
Yeah, sure. All right, yeah.
Because I think authentic is usually in the lens of just what you've experienced, right? If that makes any sense. Like, usually, like, who deems what authentic? Uh-huh. So like, you know, I get the intentions when somebody comes into our tap room and is like, but this isn't the beer I had in Germany. And I'm like, no, man, because you're having a beer in Chicago.
In Chicago.
We're a Chicago brewery. We're not a German brewery. We're a Chicago brewery. But to that point, I think one, I guess, beer experience that, you know, really would transport you back into time is, again, like, last night I was talking with Eric of Cohesion about the locale brew pubs throughout Prague.
Yeah.
And what I like about the locale brew pubs is they're modern in a way. They feel modern to me, but they still have this like traditional aspect to them.
All right, Clint.
So I'm going to bring my perspective here as somebody who has not been to Europe, has not been to Germany or the Czech Republic, and is kind of living on the coattails of all my friends and brewers that have been to this place and trying to suss out information about it and piece that trip together in my head. I would say, like, if I could think about the most authentic, or what brought me to appreciate European-style lager beer, was simply having it for the first time. And I remember it specifically. I was at a Madison Craft Beer Week event. I drank a Kronbacher, and it blew my mind, because I had never tried pale lager that wasn't American pale lager. I was so used to pale lager being this adjunct, kind of stripped down, very dry, drinkable. I mean, certainly there's a place for that stuff, but the depth of flavor that was in that's all it took, right? And it wasn't the freshest example, and it wasn't drinking it in Germany. It wasn't this awesome romantic experience, but it was enough. It was enough to send me down a pathway that I have chased for the last 10 plus years of just appreciating those beer styles. And if I'm not able to get there on my own, I want to bring it to myself and DIY it and have it here in my hometown.
I love that. At the risk of offending everybody else, you three are really cool brewers doing really cool things. Thanks for being on this panel. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for sharing your insights.
Thanks for having
you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Our thanks to Notch Brewing for having All About Beer as a media partner. Next week, my colleague Don Tess is here in the host seat for a panel on mashing methods. And trust me, it's more exciting than it sounds. Questions, comments, guest suggestions, you can do all of that by emailing me. It's John Holl, that's JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com. A reminder, please go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can check out the podcast page, the merch page, and read great new content, as well as the archives going back to 1979. You can also follow All About Beer on social media at All About Beer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, email us at info@allaboutbeer.com or go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer. Don't forget, All About Beer has a podcast channel. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. And don't forget to check out probrewer.com each week for original articles from the All About Beer team. As for this show, Mitch Weber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Holl. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.